We're talking Giants with Talking Giants podcast host Bobby Skinner. We're going to cover everything from A to Z. That's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and happy to have you with us. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And joining us on today's program, we're going to be talking Giants with Talking Giants co-host Bobby Skinner. I know a lot of you have asked for him. He is here. Bobby, thank you so much for coming on the program with me.
Thank you for having me on. I usually enjoy the time off, and I'm sure, and I am, but for some reason this year, I think it's because, actually, I know why. It's because the Giants won last year. I'm counting down the days till training camp. I need that training camp schedule. I'm excited to get there.
Okay. I thought I was the only one because usually I can't wait for the 6 weeks downtime. And I'm like, we're only in week one. So yeah, but yes, I share your sentiment, and certainly a lot to talk about with regards to the New York Giants. And I think we need to kind of rewind a little bit and look at all the things that General Manager Joe Schoen did in the offseason. You know, Darren Waller, the draft class, Bobby Okereke. Where do you think, Bobby, the biggest impact move was? Do you think it was Waller, Okereke, or maybe it was a combination of stuff?
I'm going to say Okereke because he kind of is he's like a long-term and a short-term signing. You know, he's here for 4 years, and I hope that he will play through that contract. Waller, while is the better player, can have a bigger impact. We had like a solid player in Danielle Bellinger, and we trusted this offense, you know, this offensive coaching staff and this quarterback and Saquon, like, to build around the players that they have. But Okereke was an absolute must. You had to go get a linebacker. We all knew in free agency they were going to get a linebacker because we didn't think they were going to take one in the first round or even the second round. So they had to go out and get one in free agency. And lucky for them, it was a linebacker free agency class that was very deep. You know, I think there was like 8 or 9 guys that were, you know, worth starter money in the class. So Okereke, I think he's going to help in a lot of different ways. And linebacker was the weakest position on the team last year. Wide receiver was the position we all talked about. Offensive line is always at the front of your mind, but linebacker was the weakest position on the team. And to me, the tiebreaker is that I know Okereke is going to be there for all 17 games. Waller, it's the only concern with Waller, but that is the concern that he could miss time.
Were you surprised that in free agency, the Giants really didn't address the back end, that they instead did so via the draft?
Not so much. I'm trying to think of what corners were out there in free agency. Now, I thought that they might go out and get, even if they didn't bring back Julian Love, which is something I kind of forecasted them might doing, because he didn't sign at the bye week, which it seemed like it was going to happen. It's like, okay, then they're further apart if they can't get this done at the bye week. I thought maybe they might go out there and get someone in free agency, and they got Bobby McCain, but I thought maybe someone over the vet minimum that McCain got. But the cornerback class was really fun. You know, like, it was whether you're going to take one in the first round, which they did with Deonte Banks, or in the second round, you know, a guy that was picked right before them in Tyreek Stevenson. There was a lot of corners. It seemed to be a deep corner class. So I think everybody who did mock drafts for the Giants had them going corner in the first or second round.
Yeah, I know I did. And I think in one of my mocks, I had them getting Deonte Banks, and a couple of people just snickered at me and said, nah, they're not going to. Deonte Banks is second round. And I'm like, I don't know about that, because there were whispers that he was moving up the value board. But,
and that's the difference of picking at the end of the first round compared to being in the top 10.
Exactly.
You know, what we've been used to, where it's like, you're probably going to get someone that you maybe have grade as a high second. You know, like I did my evaluation on Banks about a month before the draft, and I tweeted out, I was like, hey, there's some rawness to his game, but it's like his athletic profile, his skill set is definitely something you can see Wink Martindale wanting to get his hands on and mold. And nevertheless, we see Wink Martindale celebrating the pick on the first night of the draft.
Yeah, that was quite the sight, and Wink is still celebrating that pick, months later, a month or so later. So, all right, let's go back to the offensive side. Daniel Jones coming off probably his best career year last year, gets the new contract. Where can Daniel Jones take the next step in his development?
So everyone's going to talk about like, hey, let's push the ball downfield, and that's definitely part of it. But that wasn't really on the menu for the offense last year. Like it wasn't like he was passing. Like there was these shots that were to be taken that he was, 20 plus yards down the field that he was passing up. It was just that really wasn't on the menu for the offense because they knew the personnel that they had with the wide receivers, the offensive line, tight end, all that good stuff. Now that stuff's going to be on the menu. So can we take that without, like I don't need you to be first in interception rate like he was this past season, but let's be between 5th and 8th in interception rate. So can we take those? The one thing you look at his game from last year and you see a negative because there really wasn't much is those sideline hole shots on like those 2-man high-low reads. They were there, a few times. Like those are, you'd go through a Daniel Jones game last year and be like 95% of this right decision. The only time it wasn't was like those hole shots, which he's thrown. We've seen him be aggressive with that in the past. So just taking those shots because those are drive movers, getting 18, 19 yards. And a lot of times he complete the pass on that play, but it's only for 5-6 yards and compared to the 20 yards you get. So now that you have more speed and more defenses will have to respect, more than just one wide receiver speed and Darius Slayton like last season. How well can we, process and spread the ball around and gain chunk plays? Not just throwing, 30, 40-yard bombs, but getting those 15 to 25-yard chunk plays.
Let's talk about the receivers for a moment because the Giants, I think a lot of people will say they don't have a legitimate number one receiver unless you count Waller, who's a tight end. But do the Giants have enough different skill sets? I mean, I know you weren't there in the spring, but it looked like they were moving guys around. They were trying some different looks and whatnot. Jamison Crowder, was lining up in the slot. We saw Darius Slayton come into the slot. We saw a lot more pre-snap movements. Based on what we know about this receiver group, do they have enough to get by, even though they don't have the quote-unquote number one guy?
I mean, they were the number 15 offense in the NFL last year, and they started the season with David Sills starting. And then there was games where Marcus Johnson and David Sills were starting in the season. And you only had one person that was, a threat, that had to be respected deep, and that was Darius Slayton. Isaiah Hodgins came on well towards the end of the year, but you go look at his numbers, and they weren't through the roof. He had good red zone numbers with the touchdowns, but he was usually getting about 40 to 50 yards per game, which is solid, but it's not great. So Slayton was the only threat on the offense. Well, now you add Jalen Hyatt, Darren Waller, Paris Campbell. Like you can go out there with 11 personnel and you've got speed across the board, and it has to be respected. So which makes the life easy. Like it makes Darius Slayton big plays more available. It allows quick plays to turn into big plays with Paris Campbell and his yak ability. I'm so glad he finally had a healthy year because I remember him coming out of Ohio State and in particular watching, breaking down Dwayne Haskins. I was like, man, this Paris Campbell guy, he takes 2-yard passes and turns them into 75-yard touchdowns. So Paris Campbell has all that yak ability and then whatever they can get out of Hyatt. So you have speed. You have the good route runners in Isaiah Hodgins, Shepard if he can stay healthy, and then Wandale's kind of the wild card. So, yeah, I mean, wide receiver, like cut down day is going to be very interesting. Now, if there's injuries, it'll be less interesting. But cut down day is going to be interesting because Jamison Crowder would have been a starter week 1 for this team probably last season, and he probably gets cut if things stand the way they are right now. Colin Johnson would have been a starter week 1 last season. We don't like he's probably on the outside looking in as of this moment. So there's enough solid players to get by through a season. And I'm glad they didn't force the wide receiver 1 need this past offseason.
Yeah, Joe Schoen showing some patience when it comes to, trading for a receiver or, going for a stud defensive outside linebacker or whatever, a cornerback, whatever, just holding his water. And speaking of trades, the Giants next year, they're not getting any comp picks because, they signed more guys than they brought in. When you look at some of the excess at certain position groups, receiver, maybe cornerback, maybe even offensive line. I mean, who are some guys that you think potentially the Giants might be able to move if everything, if everybody stays healthy, that can maybe yield an extra day 3 pick or maybe even a day 2 pick?
Boy, I don't know if there's anyone on their roster. The only person, and this could be a wild card, is if they really like Campbell and being like, hey, I know we invested a 2nd round pick, we're going to trade Wan'Dale Robinson. But I don't really see anybody. The only, like, I could see bottom end of the, how it goes during training camp. It's like a guy's a likely cut. You trade him and you swap a 6th and a 5th round pick. Like the way the Giants, attained Ben Bredeson, who ended up being a good trade for the Giants, even though it was out of desperation. So I could see maybe something like that, the way the Giants, attained Isaac Yiadom a couple of years ago. But I'm trying to really no one on this, unless they just suck. Like at the trade deadline, they stink. Then you could see Darius Slayton be traded, who has another year on his contract and has been a talk of, trade deadlines in past seasons. But as long as they are in a spot where they feel like they're going for the playoffs, I don't really see anybody being traded on the team.
I mean, we have to see how it plays out, obviously, but I would think Joe Shane might look to do something because he's got to get more draft picks. I mean, he's shown that he likes to have extra picks to move up and down the board accordingly, unless next year he just says, you know what, I'm going to trade down and that's how I'm going to acquire more picks, which is certainly a possibility. But right now,
the first time in a while going into a draft, and obviously this all could change, but it's just like their picks are just 1 through 7 what they have. They're not missing any. They don't have any extras.
As of right now, that's subject to change, obviously. All right. We're talking with Bobby Skinner of Talkin Giants. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some key contributors for the 2023 season. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, get in on all the sports action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if their first bet does not win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon today and sign up to claim your no-sweat first bet. FanDuel offers great promotions, a safe and secure app to set your bets, and instant payments. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, you got Patricia Traina here on the Locked On Giants podcast, and I'm joined by Bobby Skinner of Talkin Giants, one half of the dynamic duo over there at Talkin Giants with Justin Pennick. And Bobby, let's talk about key contributors for the Giants in 2023. And I'm not talking, obviously, the Wallers and the Barkleys of the world. I'm talking about guys who maybe had a smaller role last year that might potentially have a bigger role, whether it be on offense or defense this coming year.
I think Cordell Flott is an answer where it's like, hey, no matter where he's going to be, like the expectation now is to start week 1. Mm-hmm. Where last year he's a 3rd round rookie, he's raw, but he got some playing time towards the end of the year. Look, held up all right. Now the expectation is to start, and depending on how you play is how you're going to be received. If you're not playing well by week 8, you're going to be in like people aren't going to talk about patience. They're going to be talking about waste of a 3rd round pick. If you're good, then we're talking about you as a steal. So I think Cordell Flott is very critical to this team and someone who didn't really get a ton of run last year. From other guys from last year's team is Azudu and Bredeson. And we had Dan Duggan on the show last week, and I'm going to ask you to do the same thing for him. I'm going to ask you the same thing that we asked him. If Mark Lewinsky is struggling like he did towards the start of last season, can we hammer the coaching staff on why one of Ben Bredeson or Josh Azudu will be on the bench? Because Ben Bredeson was their best interior guy last year, and they were rotating him with Nick Gates instead of just having those two start over, either putting Gates over Feliciano, who we saw the league, even coming off of a broken leg, respects Gates a lot more than they do Feliciano with the contracts they both got, and then Glowinski. So, unless Azudu is just really not ready and not good, then, Bredeson's playing. But if Bredeson's on the bench, which we would hope that a Josh Azudu, a high 3rd round pick, is starting in year 2, like he was better than Mark Lewinsky, and he's younger. So, really the only thing going for Glowinski is the contract. So I think Ben Bredesen should maybe be starting. I don't know if that really answered the question, but I can foresee myself being frustrated with the lineup for the offensive line on the interior.
Yeah, no, I get your point. And, to be fair to Glowinski, how much of his struggles were a result of Neil struggling next to him and then, Neil going out of the lineup? Because sometimes, and you played offensive line, I think, in college, sometimes the guy next to you can either bring you up or he can drag you down. So, but I could see a scenario where if you start to see Glowinski rotating with, Bredesen or McKeithen or whoever, that's a sign that, they're getting ready to make a transition, because as you know, whenever they rotate offensive linemen in there, it means that they don't know who they want. So
yeah, it just stinks for a guy like Ben Bredesen, who again was their best interior guy last season, and he seems to be the guy without even a position to just fully practice at, where he's at center and left guard and nothing at right guard yet, even though he's played there in his career. So it's just it reminds me of Nick Gates 2020, where Nick Gates at the end of the 2019 season was playing better than basically everyone on that offensive line, not named Kevin Zeitler. But there didn't seem to be any clear path home for him. It's like you weren't going to play him at tackle. That wasn't his home. The guards were filled by Hernandez and Zeitler. Neither one of those guys. But it's like, all right, put him at center. And it ended up working out for them. That's where I view Ben Bredesen coming off this past season, where it's like on an offensive line that wasn't good, Ben Bredesen probably shouldn't be on the bench.
Yeah, I'd like to see him in there somewhere, but where, I'm not sure. He's going to compete at center, although I think we both agree that John Michael Schmitz is going to win that job. The left guard competition, for sure, he's going to compete at. So we'll see where he lands up. But just going back to the original question, what about a bigger role for Aaron Robinson, Daniel Bellinger, Dane Belton, maybe Jason Pinnock? Do you see bigger roles for those guys?
Belton will be the interesting one, because Sean Morash, he had him on his show a couple weeks ago and said, like, hey, he re-injured the collarbone, and that's why he wasn't playing towards down the stretch. So yeah, that's the safety position next to McKinney is wide open, and you can make a case for like 4 or 5 different guys, like Bobby McCain, Pinnock, Belton, and I think even Javarius Owens, the 7th round pick out of Houston, like he's got better film than a late 7th round pick. What was the other? Oh, Aaron Robinson. Aaron Robinson, if he can stay healthy, that was the most frustrating thing about last season with their cornerback situation. Is like, man, I don't think this guy's going to be good on the outside, but I like him on the slot, and especially in this Wink Martindale defense where he plays that press man. He's very physical in the run game, where like Aaron Robinson is not a player if I would give up on if you can get health out of him, especially as a slot corner. I don't want him on the outside. He was on the outside last year out of necessity and then got injured. But slot corner could be a nice home for him. Like, I haven't given up on him as a player yet. It's just the injuries are so frustrating. So, but now you have Adoree Jackson, you have Cordell Flott and Deonte Banks. Can Aaron Robinson come back healthy, stay healthy, and challenge for some playing time? Or if a guy goes down, come in there and step in and play well.
Yeah, I thought the same thing about Aaron Robinson, because he played the slot in college, and the Giants felt that he had the size to move outside. Then, of course, he goes and he gets injured. But now they've got Banks and Jackson, who are going to be their perimeter guys. And, I asked Jerome Henderson about maybe having a committee at slot, and he said, ideally you want to have one guy who could do it all. But given how offenses are mixing and matching their slot receivers, putting a tight end in there, a bigger receiver, a smaller receiver, what have you, you want to be able to play matchup football. And they haven't really been able to do that, as much as they wanted to last year.
And his offenses are putting, they're more wide receiver based, more, 11 personnel. The more slot wide receivers and slot corners become a part of run fits. And that's a worry with Cordell Flott with his weight. I'm interested to see what he's weighing at now. But Cordell Flott got eaten alive by blocks last season because of that size, where Aaron Robinson, that's the strength for him. Like, he can come in and put his nose in the run game and make a difference. So that is something that is important. I know that's something that they've emphasized with the additions of Ashawn and Nacho Okereke. Like, they were embarrassed by the way that they could not stop the run last year.
Yeah, that was. I blame that on the linebackers. I mean, the linebackers couldn't fill the holes. They just
no. It's one of the worst. I mean, we've seen some bad linebacker play for the last 5 years, but since I've been covering the team in 2019, it was the worst linebacker play.
Yeah.
And we started week 1 in 2019 with Alec Ogletree and Tay Davis.
Yeah, it was pretty bad, but they did fortify it. Okereke, Gerard Davis should be a little bit better now that he's had a full off season. They're getting Darian Beavers back. Micah McFadden's the guy that Wink Martindale was praising. I think they've got a couple of other guys. Carter Coughlin, Cam Brown can, maybe get them some snaps. So they've got competition there. And quite honestly, how often are they going to be in their base anyway? So, maybe those guys will end up in the sub packages, I would think. But, I guess they need to see where the strength's going to be. If it's going to be at that second linebacker, or if it makes more sense to put an extra DB on the field, for the run support. So that's going to be an interesting battle as well. Now, another, position that I think was kind of a surprise to me that they didn't really do anything with was outside linebacker. They basically had the same cast of characters as last year. Did that surprise you? And are you concerned about that?
Well, obviously everyone loves trading up for Deonte Banks and trading for Jalen Hyatt, right? And I agree. But I pointed it out after the draft. It was hey, be excited about it. But there's also downfalls to this. You lost a 4th round pick, a 5th round pick, the 7th I don't care about. But you lost a 4th round and a pick and a 5th round pick. You went between your next pick after Jalen Hyatt was a comp pick and Eric Gray, or maybe not a comp pick, maybe the pick from their other 6th round pick or 5th round pick. That's where you get those depth guys, and they are one injury away from Kayvon and Aziz to having a bad edge room. And Aziz was injured 5 different times last season. Jihad Ward's a good edge setter, good run defender, but he gives you no pass rush production, none whatsoever. And as good as a run defender is, there's times where he's not able to make the play because he doesn't have the athleticism to finish that play. And we need Kayvon the Giants really need Kayvon to step up as a run defender. He's got it in him. He was a little streaky last season. But yeah, after that, Ocean Zimenez, who it's a mean line, but my line for him is he's a pass rush specialist who doesn't rush the passer very well. Ellison Smith, who's got injured after 1 defensive snap last season. Timon Fox, who he's a guy who can rush with the plan, but he's limited. You really have nobody else out there. Baldonado, the UDFA, they got a pit. He can be a good run defender, but he's probably not going to give you tons of pass rush production. But I think he's someone who can actually make the roster. Fox made the roster last season. I can see Baldonado making the roster because they just have no depth there. And they're 1 injury away from having a bad starting duo there.
So am I exaggerating when I say that position is maybe a little bit of a concern?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a position where if I thought the best player available was that position, take it in the 1st round. If they drafted Myles Murphy in the 1st round, I would have been celebrating it this past year. I thought he was a 1st round player in the end of the 1st round. I would have been celebrating that. So, but hey, it's a weird situation for the Giants where they're ahead of schedule, where they made the playoffs last year where they weren't supposed to make the playoffs. So you want to build on that, but you look at the roster and it's barren, and there is no way you were going to turn it all the way around in just 2 off seasons. So that's where, as much as we're excited about the Giants, they made the playoffs, you kind of got to temper your expectations a little bit. It's there's still a lot to be built out on this roster.
All right. And coming up next, we're going to talk about some of those concerns and what still needs to be done. So don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. You got Patricia Traina, your host, and I'm joined by Bobby Skinner of Talkin Giants, one half of the dynamic duo over there. And we are talking Giants. It's the name of your podcast, yeah. Locked On Giants. We're locked on. So, and Bobby, when you look at concerns for this team, now I haven't even mentioned Saquon, so I got to mention it. I know people are tired of hearing about the situation there, but let me ask you, I have my opinions about how it's going to play out, but how concerned are you about where this is headed with Saquon?
To be honest, I'm not concerned at all because I think Saquon playing on the franchise tag is good for the Giants. Right? I feel like it's the Giants being able to get their cake and have it too, where everyone's like, you can't let Saquon walk. It's no, Giants aren't letting him walk. They're playing him on the franchise tag. I do not expect him to miss a single game, even if he misses all of training camp. He's the guy who won't even leak out information. You think he's going to, because he doesn't want to look bad. He's not going to miss a game for the team. Like, even if it's not right, fans will turn on him quick if he's missing games. But with his injury history, with his history of not dealing with being banged up very good, like, and the running back position, while I don't buy into it as much as other people, like, he's someone that is worrisome with if he can stay healthy. So I don't really want to put a lot of years invested into him, but I also no way I want to lose that type of player who's that important for this team from the team. So I think the franchise tag is having their cake and eating it too.
Do you think he'll sign the franchise tag, or do you think they'll get a long-term deal done with him?
So this depends, and this is where we don't know the guaranteed money. It's frustrating. If the guaranteed money that the Giants are offering is solid, and the hang-up, like everyone's saying that thinks the guaranteed money is the hang-up, and because Saquon says he doesn't want to reset the market. But Saquon went into these negotiations asking for $16 million. Have they really budged off of that? Has Saquon Barkley's team? Because that's not resetting the market. That's just getting, what Christian McCaffrey got. It's not resetting the market, especially, 2 years after that too. So, the market's supposed to go up, even though it didn't for the running back spot. If the guaranteed money that the Giants are offering is solid, I think he's gonna crack and sign the contract. But if the guaranteed money is bad, along with the 13 to 14 million average annual value, then I see him playing on the franchise tag. But if the guaranteed money is solid at 13 million a year, I think Saquon Barkley realized, like, hey, this sucks. This is not where I wanted this to go. But playing on the franchise tag is not going to do me any favors.
Yeah, and then the other thing, Bobby, that I wonder about, and I unless I'm misreading the tea leaves here, in the past, Saquon was the offense. Now, moving forward, they have some other options to where maybe they don't have to dump as much on him, that maybe they can, reduce some of his snaps just a little bit to keep him fresh. Because as you mentioned, he does get dinged. He was dinged last year, had the shoulder, and we saw a drop off, in the middle part of the year.
And that's where I get a little frustrated with the conversation on Saquon. It's like, well, the offense ran through him. It's like, well, who else on this roster did you want them to run the offense through? Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins? Like, sorry, that's not going to happen. Now they add Darren Waller. Now they add some more speed. This should be a little more of a balanced offense. And the offense running through Saquon Barkley was to its detriment in the middle of the season. Like, that middle part of the season when they were losing and people like, see, when, the offense ran through Saquon. It's like, yeah, the Giants would continue to hand the ball to him like 20 times a game, though, and we're doing play action on 2nd and 15, and no one was biting it at that point. So that was the problem. And then when they stopped running it through them, and because teams were game planning for Saquon and started doing drop back, quick game stuff, that's when you saw the offense the best. That's when you saw Saquon Barkley start to, his yard per carry started to go up. Like the playoff game. He had 9 carries in that game. Oh, Saquon can't get just 9 carries. That was beautiful. He took advantage of every single one. I don't need Saquon being a high volume guy. He doesn't need to lead the league in carries like he did last year. He needs to be a guy who takes advantage of every single touch, and that's when Saquon Barkley is at his best. He's never supposed to be a Derrick Henry workhorse type of back. So now that you add Darren Waller, you add some speed, yeah, hopefully the offense shouldn't have to run through him. Like Daniel Jones had more rushing yards than him through that 4-game stretch, that 4-game lull in the middle of the season. The Texans game last year, that to me was one of the worst offensive game plans of the season, despite the fact that they won. The Texans were selling out to stop the run, and they ran the ball 35 times. The only time they scored is when they threw the ball on early downs. Like, all of the scoring was due to Daniel Jones passing, and because the Texans were leaving it there, but the Giants were not taking it. They just continued to hand it off and hand it off. So thank God the Texans offense was bad enough that the Giants didn't lose that game, because they did not play well offensively, despite the fact that that was like Daniel Jones' highest yards per attempt in his career. But they only let him throw the ball a handful of times, even though every single pass turned into like 20 to 25 yards. So yeah, hopefully the offense doesn't run through Saquon Barkley going forward. And it's not a knock on Saquon. It's just that shouldn't be the way. That's not the winning way. If we had an offensive line that was just dominant and as run blockers, then yeah, go for it. But we're not there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll see, but some question marks certainly on that offensive line, like we talked about earlier. Speaking of question marks, there are still some Daniel Jones haters out there that think that last year, he wasn't anything special, one hit wonder, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what side of the fence you stand on, but, you know, when you look at Daniel Jones's game, where can he get better? And do you think last year was just him just getting lucky because he was in a contract year?
Yeah, those hole shots is where they get the. No, I don't think like if you go and watch film of those Jason Garrett years, like you saw how much the play calling hauled this offense back. And I cannot, like, offensive coordinator is always the easiest scapegoat for a fan base, right? But like, no, go actually watch it, man. And it was really, really bad. And hey, you can call Jason Garrett, the offensive coordinator, the scapegoat. Joe Judge wanted to fire Jason Garrett, but the front office didn't let him. And then eventually they did, and then they had one healthy play of Daniel Jones before he got injured with Freddie Kitchens. I don't think Freddie Kitchens is going to be some all-world offensive coordinator either. So finally they had, like, people say, well, does Daniel Jones need everything to be perfect around him to succeed? No, but can we get one of the three elements good of offensive line, receivers, or play calling? Like last year, he had basically 1.5. He had a good offensive coaching, and a good left tackle, which the rest of the offensive line wasn't good pass blocking, but at least a left tackle. So he had 1.5 of the three aspects that really help a quarterback. So no, I don't think it was a fluke. Now, do I think Daniel Jones is ever going to be a top 5 quarterback? Absolutely not. I don't think he's ever going to be an MVP. But I also don't think I think there's value in having a good quarterback that's not great in the NFL. And we broke this down where I'm using the phrase the Giants can have their cake and eat it too. Giving Daniel Jones contract does not stop that from moving on from him in the future. We looked at the five best young quarterbacks in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes, Herbert, Burrow, Allen, and Lamar Jackson. Those are like the 5 best young guys. You can even throw Jalen Hurts in there. Every single guy, one of those guys, when they were drafted, most of them weren't drafted first overall, except for Joe Burrow. All 5 of those teams had quarterbacks under contract, like real contracts. You know, Phillip Rivers, Andy Dalton, Alex Smith, Tyrod Taylor, and even the one that had the smallest was Tyrod Taylor, but the Bills were coming off of a playoff berth, so they had to trade up from 22 to go get their guy. And then the Ravens had Joe Flacco. The Eagles they didn't even start beginning to pay Carson Wentz when they drafted Jalen Hurts. So if 2 years from now that Daniel Jones is solid, but he's not really the guy that they want to go for going forward, it doesn't stop them from going and getting that guy that they identify. Now, if that guy's at 1-1, yeah, it stops them from getting the guy who's going to go first overall. But how many times do we look back at a draft and it's the quarterback that went 11th that ends up being the best in the class?
Overall, Bobby, where's your biggest concern about this team moving forward? What's the one factor that you think if it doesn't pan out, it's going to derail things?
Evan Neal. I think he is the biggest decider of how good this offense can be. Now, with the new additions, the offense should be better regardless. You have guys that can beat man coverage and create big plays, which you don't need the best offensive line in the world to beat man coverage for big plays. But to beat zone coverages and zone beating plays down the field, you do need protection, and it limits what you can do. Like a lot of the stuff that Buffalo did well, and they didn't even do it with great offensive lines. But Evan Neal, he is the decider of how good this offense can be to me. Like, I think he's the decider of if he's good, it could be a top 10 offense without a doubt. If he's not, I think they're limited to like that 14th to 20th range.
Amazing how one player can just kind of sway the opinions and the expectations.
And he was picked 7th overall, so it's not like we're putting unnecessary expectations on the guy. Like, he's supposed to be really good.
Well, let's hope he takes that Andrew Thomas like leap in year 2. You know, working with Willie Anderson should certainly help. You know, having exclusively worked on the right side after working, on the left side during his final year of college, that should help. Because you're right, if he doesn't step up that whole offensive line, you're like, doesn't matter.
I mean, it's immediate. He was giving up quick pressures, right?
Yeah.
So if he could just be slightly above average, like, it's a huge upgrade for this team.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Bobby, great stuff as always. I appreciate you coming on with me. He is Bobby Skinner of Talkin Giants. Make sure you check out their pods. I'm sure a lot of you already are, but they do a great job. Bobby and Justin, 2 of my favorites. So, Bobby, I want to thank you for coming on. It was good seeing you, catching up. And Giant fans, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast. Make sure you keep it here all week. We have more interviews coming up. We've got Coach Gene Clemens, former NFL executive Jeff Diamond is going to be on the program. We're going to have Mina Kimes of ESPN. She's going to be on with me next week. So we got plenty more coming up. For Bobby Skinner, I'm Patricia Chano. Giant fans, we will see you again tomorrow.